Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Straight Up With Steph. I'm so stoked about today's conversation because we're taking a different perspective on the OPA issue. If you haven't heard about it, I'm going to put a link in the show notes on a podcast episode I've already done on this. But the OPA stands for the Oral Preventive Assistant. This is a new clinical position that the American Dental Association has invented to supposedly solve or not solve, but at least help the workforce shortage, specifically the hygienist shortage. I think this has a huge potential to completely change dentistry as we know it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that I am. And we've heard a lot of chatter, or at least I have, from dentists and hygienists on this issue, but have we stopped to ask assistants how they feel about this? Sometimes I feel like dental assistants are just being thrown in there like pawns with this tension between dentists and hygienists right now. But have we stopped to ask them, is this something that you want? When I talk about this on social media, I often hear from dental assistants, and most of the time they are saying they're already overworked, they're already burnt out, they already can't do the tasks on their to-do list. Like, why do they want to do our job too? And I get it. I totally understand. I know that we need to find a solution for the shortage. It's a real thing, and there's some practices that are really struggling out there. I just don't necessarily know if this is it. To really dive into the assistant perspective, I brought on my friend Kevin. He is a passionate advocate for dental assistants, and he has a lot to say about this. Do dental assistants really want this? If they do, should they expect to make more money, and how much more? He also gives some great tips on how dental assistants can advocate for themselves when their practice wants them to become an OPA. A lot of us already know, if we've worked in practices, that there's some tension already between hygienists and assistants for whatever reason. And I think that this could potentially make that worse, because the oral preventive assistant, the goal of that is for assistants to start scaling teeth super gingerly and also probe, which is kind of in the hygienist wheelhouse, right? So I would imagine if we've got OPAs that are starting to do the hygienist job, there might be some increased tension there as well. Kevin and I talked today, though, about if you really get down to it, hygienists and assistants are more alike than different. And really, it just comes down to communication, just like literally anything else in life, right? Any other relationship, if there's tension, we need to talk it out. And we especially need to do that with this situation. So he gives us some great insight on how we can really just kind of slow down and be empathetic and understand each other. Like I said, I think that this has the potential to really change dentistry. I mean, if you look at medicine, for example, there's positions, there's not just doctors and nurses, there's medical assistants, there's PAs, there's all these different mid-level providers. And I think the OPA is an example of that. And maybe because they've made it work in medicine, we can make it work here in dentistry too. But in any case, I don't really know what is going to happen with this. But today I wanted to really dive into how dental assistants feel about this, because at least on my end, I haven't heard enough about that. So I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Kevin. Hey, it's Steph, and welcome to the Straight Up With Steph podcast, where we have real discussions around health and life and just trying to be better at both. Hello, Kevin. Thank you so much for being on Straight Up With Steph. I'm happy to see you.
I'm glad to see you as well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I always enjoy talking with you. And we were talking just a bit ago about all of these changes that we're having in dentistry right now. And it seems like there's a lot of hygienists and dentists talking about how they feel. But I want to hear about the dental assistant perspective. But before we get into that, I know about you and I know you, but for those who don't, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad to be a Coloradan like you, and I'm glad to have been working with dental assistants for the past 20 plus years. I've always been on the dental journalism side of things, so I've been the managing editor for Dental Economics, editorial director for Dental Products Report, and now I'm the editor-in-chief for drbicuspid.com. But while I've done that throughout the years, I've always had a passion for what the assistants do. There aren't a lot of us out there talking directly to the assistants, so I'm lucky enough to travel around the world speaking to assistants and kind of being in their Facebook groups and checking in And yeah, OPAs are a very hot topic on all sides of things, including on the dental assisting side too.
It's like anytime I post about this or talk about it, I do hear from dental assistants.
Mhm.
And for the most part, honestly, Kevin, and I don't know if this is how everyone feels, probably not, but they're like, we can't even do our job. Why do we
Right.
want to do your job? So I guess starting out, what's your temperature on how people feel about this?
I think you nailed it. Honestly, I was at the Star of the North meeting up in Minneapolis and talked to so many dental assistants up there, and that was one of the biggest reactions I got is that we're already stretched thin. We're already feeling the burnout, and Steph, so often when a new assistant comes into the practice, it's up to the current assistant usually to train him or her, and so that adds on already. And so I think there's a lot of concern about where am I going to find 120 hours to do this training? What does that mean whenever I get back to the practice? Am I going to get paid more? And as you said, how am I supposed to keep up with infection control duties, turning over the rooms, everything else that the dental assistant already does? So while I think a lot of dental assistants are nervous about that, they're also nervous about, then does this cause an even greater shortage of dental assistants and people to do their job? So I think you're spot on.
That's where I'm just like, okay, wait, this whole thing was brought up to supposedly solve the workforce shortage, right? But
Mhm.
I'm like, do we also have a shortage of dental assistants? I don't feel like this is going to solve any kind of shortage issue.
To me, it's a shell game. And I know that the folks at the ADA probably don't want to hear that, but it very much is, because if you're going to find a way to help the hygienist by making these OPAs a part of our dental industry, then you are putting more pressure on the dental assistants, as well as, I think, creating openings. Just like we don't have all the hygienists coming in to the industry that we need, we certainly don't have that many assistants coming in. And I think that that's something that we have to be very cognizant of whenever we're looking at OPAs, and not just how they can help the hygienist, but again, what does it do to the current assisting core moving forward? Because I do think that not only does it create stress, but it's going to create openings too.
So I guess maybe we should back up a little bit just for people who don't know what we're talking about. Like I assume everyone knows, but they probably don't. So we've mentioned OPA. What is the OPA?
The OPA is Oral Preventive Assistant, and it's very interesting. I just returned from the Dental Trade Alliance meetings on Capitol Hill, and one of the things that we talked about with various senators and Congress people is the workforce shortage. And I was amazed to hear the OPA brought up by the ADA while we were at these meetings. So it's definitely a talking point that's being pushed forward. And if you haven't heard about it, you will. Oral preventive assistants, lack of a better term, are going to be assistants who are going to be trained to do some scaling, and we need to make sure that we realize that they're not going to immediately become hygienists. But with 120 hours of training, they will then have the ability to do some scaling, and in my baseball terminology, become the setup man for the dental hygienist then to come in and finish the scaling and what needs to be done.
And my concerns, I guess, with when the ADA first came up with this, I was just reading about it and it said that the assistants would have to already have passed like a CODA accredited dental assistant training program and they have to have a set number of years of experience. But I almost am like, sure, that's what the ADA said initially, but I feel like this individual states probably can just do whatever they want, right?
Yeah, well, and we're already seeing that. There's been a lot of talk, excuse me, in the state of Oregon about making sure that dental assistants can get into the practice easier. And one of the ways that they're going to do that is lower the number of questions they have to get right whenever it comes to their infection control training. For me as a patient, I don't like to hear that.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're always moving the bar to make sure that we're making the workforce shortage better, but I wonder what we're sacrificing in that term as well.
I feel like this is opening the door for a very slippery slope. People are like, no, don't worry. They're only going to be scaling supra gingivally. And we all know like you're not done if you're just doing super gingerly. Like we're always slipping at least a little bit under the gum. And so I'm like, well, what if they start with this? And then a couple years later, they're like, well, they can go 1 to 3 millimeter sub. And then it's going to turn into scaling and root planing, which is what a hygienist does, you know?
Absolutely. There's a lot of confusion out there on the assistant side of things. And I think you're exactly right is where is the line? Because it's being pitched to a lot of assistants that I talk to as this is just a different version of assisted hygiene. Look at it in this respect. And I think you're exactly right because you know as well as I do when this is implemented, and I don't think it's a question of if, I think it's a question of when, then is that the last stop on the train? Or do you build more tracks because all of a sudden this is working so well? As you said, it could be 1 to 3 millimeters down the road and the next steps that come with that.
I feel like, hopefully I'm wrong, but I don't know if I am. I just feel like assistants are kind of being thrown around like pawns in this issue, and no one has really stopped to be like, what do you want? Is this something assistants even want to do? Like, even if
Well,
they had the time, do they want to do this?
I'm going to say it's a mixed crowd. I have asked that question, and I will say that there are some, and we know how many hygienists were assistants at one point. And so some of the assistants are looking at this as almost the warp speed to eventually become a hygienist. And so a lot of them are looking at this as an opportunity to go down that path. But there are others that very much love being an assistant. They love not doing the scaling every day. They love the difference of being a chairside assistant and all the different things that happen with that. And they're very nervous that they're going to get pulled into something that they're not really, to be perfectly frank, excited about doing. So I think that there's a very mixed bag out there with that, but there's also a lot of hesitation because, as you said, I don't think a lot of people, when this has happened, have looked at what it's really going to do to the assistant. And I will just be very blunt. The American Dental Assistants Association doesn't have the strength in numbers and the strength in voice that it did at one point. And I think that for this to come along, there's also not a strong voice out there representing assistants as a whole to issue what might be concerns or to throw out their own guidelines of what they'd like to see.
Well, and I wonder too, just kind of based off of what you just said, what about like liability insurance? What about CE? Like, have we figured that out, or are we just going to kind of just figure it out as we go?
I almost feel like it's what you just said. It's figured out as we go, because I think that there's such a need right now in the mind of the ADA, in the mind of the dentist community. There's such a need for this right now to make sure that those hygiene appointments are moving forward and not being put on hold or whatever that might be, which absolutely, don't get me wrong, that's very important. But I also think that we have to consider, as you said, if we're moving folks from assisting into this hygiene column, what happens over here when things need to be sterilized, when the room needs to be turned over, whenever that patient needs to be walked up to the front, all the things that we kind of take for granted with the assistant, what happens then? And are we just piling more onto their plate?
Assistants do so much in the practice. Like, I'm one of those hygienists. I was never an assistant. So I still don't fully understand everything they do. However, I've worked in dental offices for a long time and I see it. They're just like, they've got their hand in everything. And you said it. It's almost like we don't realize the benefit that they provide to our office. But if we don't have an assistant doing assisting, like the office falls apart.
And to be perfectly honest, the reason that I got into the whole dental assisting advocacy and speaking and everything else 20 plus years ago was because there wasn't that many people out there speaking to the assistant, and that hasn't changed in 20 plus years. So this is a demographic that's very overlooked in the dental practice and has a stigma attached to it of, well, they're easily replaceable. They don't need the education that hygienists need. And in many states, they don't even have to have CE. So they, we can find them at a Taco Bell in the morning. And that's the problem that we have right now with dental assisting as a whole is that it's always been seen as this kind of in the shadows. Well, they'll always be there. Taking out the trash is part of their job. I mean, unfortunately, that is now kind of coming back to haunt us a little bit, because how do we tell people we need to become a dental assistant because it's so great and you're changing lives, when for years they know that they're working in the shadows, they're the least paid members of the dental team, and all these negative things that have been associated with the job.
Well, and I think now with everything that's going on, that could potentially be worse because I've heard from dental assistants, or like when I talk about the OPA, they're like, this is just a reason or a way that practice owners or dentists can pay less, have us do a hygienist job and not pay us. And that's just got to feel pretty shitty.
Yeah, no argument. And I think one of the things that we have to figure out with this OPA is, if you're telling people, no, you're not going to be a hygienist, but you're still doing hygiene related activities, and you're posing it as, well, this is just assisted hygiene, look at it in a different lens, there still has to be a monetary compensation there for it if your dental assistant is going to do this, and he or she's going to go through all the training, and he or she's going to change his or her job. You have to look at it as, you're going to have to figure this out in your practice budget as well. Those dentists out there who have paid their dental assistants $18, $19, $20 an hour are going to find that that's simply not going to fly if now you're adding this in, and the dental assistant knows darn good and well that that's adding to the bottom line of the practice through the hygiene column.
Have you talked to or heard of practice owners that are planning on using this? And are they planning on paying them more? Because they damn well better be paying, the
Yeah,
OPA more.
it's coming at a very interesting time. And one of the things, again, I heard in Washington, D.C. at this Dental Trade Alliance meeting I was just at, is all the concerns that there are out there about tariffs, and how that is going to impact the cost for the dental practice. And I know it's a very politically charged issue, and I don't want to I want to walk the middle of the road here. But the number of manufacturers and dealers that I talked to in Washington, D.C., the bottom line is, any tariff costs from China, EU, wherever it might be, are going to be passed along to the practice.
Hmm.
So you're already talking about, maybe in the short term, who knows how long this will be, but you're going to talk about higher costs that eventually are going to have to be passed along to the patient as well. The dental practice simply can't absorb it. So at the same time that you've got this coming in that may put some financial strain on the practice, you've also got then the OPAs coming in as well. And these assistants are going to say, look, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. You're going to have to pay me an extra $20 an hour or whatever that might be, because the worst kept secret in the dental practice is how much each other makes. And the dental assistant knows what the dental hygienist makes. And so the dental assistants are nervous about it, but I will say there are some out there that see it as an opportunity to make more money as well. And that is truly the excitement for them of it.
I can understand that. I guess I just want dental assistants, like kind of what you're getting at, is just really advocate for yourself. I'm in Colorado like you, and there are some offices that really utilize EDAs. And these EDAs are placing fillings and like helping with crowns and all that. And some of them aren't being paid anymore. And I'm just like, okay, you're helping the dentist produce a lot more money than they could do on their own. Like you should be making more. And I feel like that's the same with the OPA.
It is. And one of the things that I always tell my dental assistants, whether I'm speaking in South Africa or Minnesota or wherever it is, it's that you almost have to say, this is how much I'm worth to the practice. This is where I'm impacting the bottom line, and almost spell it out in crayon so that the dentist can really see why you're worth that raise. And you could say the same thing for hygienists or anybody else out there, I have no doubt. But for dental assistants, for them to wrap their head around, not only do they need to prove their worth, but they also have to remember that the dental practice isn't just a practice, it's a business. And to really show their impact on the bottom line, absolutely, with this OPA, that's going to be more important for them, as you said, to self-advocate more than they ever have in the past.
I just am nervous because a lot of assistants, and I'm generalizing here, but there's a lot of them that come into our field very young. They're trained on the job, they're inexperienced. And so I feel like some of them will be taken advantage of with this.
Well, I want to go back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago about the graduation from the CODA accredited schools. Since COVID, we don't have that many CODA accredited schools that are out there. And so you're exactly right. What you're seeing from dental assistants now is a lot of on the job trained. You're seeing a lot of dentists that have opened up dental assisting schools in their practice, and they are training dental assistants and selecting the best ones from that class to stick with them and sending the others out in the world for their colleagues. So it's a whole different model of dental assistant education than it used to be. And it goes back to that stereotype once again of, well, you can pick up a dental assistant off the street and train him or her and all will be well. Whenever you bring in OPA and you start talking about the scaling and what all this means for not only the practice, but the patient and his or her health, then I think it's a completely different conversation. We really need to start valuing this dental assistant education and what those 120 hours are really going to mean, because a lot of these dental assistants, as you said, there are going to be prerequisites for them to get to that point. But we have to make sure not only are they qualified at that point, but that they're actually excited about it. They're not being drugged into this as well.
When we look at hygiene versus, let's just say, restorative dentistry in a practice, it's completely different skill sets, mindsets, passions. I mean, that's why we see when dentists have to do cleanings, they hate it because they're not passionate about it. They're not as honed in on prevention like hygienists are. And so when we talk about just train a dental assistant to do that, it's like, it's a completely different skill set. And if you don't love it, you're going to hate it.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, there are dental assistants who want to stay as dental assistants.
Yeah.
They respect the hygienist and they say, you do your job over there, I'm going to be over here doing my job. Great. And so all of a sudden, if you're in a state where OPAs are popping up and the dentist goes, hey, this would be a great thing for our practice, I'm truly concerned about how many dental assistants will this run away from our industry, and how many will all of a sudden decide, you know what? I don't want to go down that career path, so see ya.
And with burnout too, you mentioned that earlier, and we know that dentists and hygienists have burnout. I mean, are dental assistants burnt out too right now?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely they are. And I think that, and I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this, because while I just a few minutes ago talked about how there's this misnomer out there about the dental assistants and them having the lack of training and everything else, the dental assistants also don't have the skin in the game that the dentists and the hygienists do, because they haven't, for the vast majority of them, they haven't put forth the money to get the training to where they are today. And so a lot of them can walk away from the profession and really they can be trained to do something else or do something else. We don't want that to happen, but it's a very real fact that when the only training you've had, as you might have mentioned, is on the job training or through a dental assisting school that maybe you paid a minimal amount of money to be a part of, you don't really feel like, well, gosh, I spent all this to become this, so I've got to stay as this. That isn't there with dental assistants. They're a much more migratory group than the other dental professionals that are in the practice.
It's interesting. When we look at, like, if I look at dental hygienists, and there's some that have gone to get advanced certification in like restorative, right? And they're doing some restorative duties. And I've had people ask me, they're like, how can you be supportive of that and not be supportive of assistants learning this? And up until recently, I was like, I don't know. How can I? And I don't want to not be supportive of someone advancing in their profession. However, I've come to realize it's different. The skill set is different. The education is different. We're coming into the field with different levels of education. And so, no, it's not the same when we're talking about training an assistant to scale.
I always encourage dental assistants, go for your EFTA, go for your CDA, get those acronyms after your name. Absolutely. But again, that's all within the field of dental assisting.
Yeah.
And I think whenever you're talking about an OPA, that's kind of going over into a different field. And I know there will be some out there that are going to be very excited about this. As I mentioned earlier, it's their first step toward becoming a hygienist. It's a way to get more money. There's different reasons that they'll be motivated to do that. But I think it's a different motivation than it is whenever you're a dental assistant and your state offers an EFTA or DA2 or all the different possibilities that are out there depending on the state.
So, what do you see as a solution for what the OPA is supposedly solving?
I don't know, to be perfectly frank. And I've really tried to wrap my head around that, because if I'm going to be hearing dental assistants say, we can't do this, I also know we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over in dentistry and expect the same results. We know the workforce is shrinking, and I will tell you the numbers that I'm hearing from the ADA Health Policy Institute, the numbers I'm hearing from Danby, the numbers I'm hearing from a lot of different sources out there is that we're going to have fewer and fewer dental assistants to choose from moving forward. So with that in mind, and knowing so many of our, shall we say, seasoned dental assistants are getting ready to age out of the profession as well, and there's nobody there to replace them, I don't know the answer. I'm very worried about where dental assisting is going as a profession. I absolutely am, not just because of the lack of a strong national governing association, but even on the state level. You know, you and I are in Colorado. There's not an active Colorado Dental Assistants Association. A lot of these dental assistants are literally on an island. So whenever we say advocate for yourselves, it's literally them out there saying, this is why I'm important. There's no resources or anything else. And so when you don't have resources, but yet you're being asked to do this, and you know that things are changing, where do you find that middle ground? And the answer is, I really don't know. I wish I did, Stephanie, but man, there's so many things out there that dentistry needs to change. And I think it starts with how you keep people in this industry, how you make sure that the dental assistants don't leave. And I really see the OPA as something that could cause an exit flood. I absolutely do.
I'm at a practice right now. The dental assistants there are highly trained, they're educated, they're valued. We all know the value of dental assistants at this practice. However, I've also worked in offices where they were just treated like trash. And so do you think some of this just starts with improving workplace conditions and really like demonstrating value?
Yeah. You know, I think for years and years and years, we've rolled our eyes when we talk about culture and
Yeah.
leadership and all these kind of touchy feely things. But I will tell you, the practice that you're describing you're in right now, where the dental assistants are valued, it's what every dental assistant wants.
Yeah.
And I think if you're really somewhere that they feel like they're part of the team, they feel like they're valued, they feel like they're appreciated, they're not going to look down the street for another dollar or two out an hour raise and leave you. So I think if you're working in a practice right now that doesn't see the value of dental assistants, you've got to change that, because if they don't see the value, all of a sudden, if they see dollar signs in your eyes because, oh, now you're going to be an OPA, it's going to be awesome. And all of a sudden you've got a smile on your face. They know darn good and well that it's not because it's their best interests, but it's your best interests in mind.
Yeah, and that's not a good feeling. How do dental assistants like to be appreciated, or how can offices show that they value them?
It boils down to what I always encourage my dental assistants to do is set up a time twice a year with the doctor or the office manager or whoever's really in charge of their career path, and sit down and say, look, here's the things I think I'm doing well as an assistant. Here's the things that I'd love to learn or that maybe I'm not proficient in right now. And really come up with that. How do I get better at what I do? Because I think whenever we're really good at something, we love to do it. And I think that that's the key thing is you have these meetings twice a year where you sit down and you say, start of the year, sit down and say, here's my goal. And by June 30th, I want to do this halfway through the year, you know, and you and the doctor work together to have that goal come to life. And then July 1st, it's a sit down and it's a look at what did we do the first half of the year? Where are we? How did you impact the bottom line of the practice? And how do we grow in the second half of the year then? So I think as long as there's that one-on-one communication and the dental assistant really knows this is where my career path is going, this is what they're investing in me outside of just a day-to-day salary, I think things like that go a long ways for the assistant.
Well, and it demonstrates too that there's a future and it's not just a day to day, like grinding it out with the patients. It's like we've got bigger goals and we want you to grow as a clinician too.
And knowing how those goals align with the practice's growth as well. Where does that doctor see the practice a year from now? I'm sure every doctor out there has plans for where they want to be, how they want to grow. Well, make sure your team's involved with that. It can't just be your vision. It's got to be all their visions together. And yes, at the end of the day, if the practice grows and everybody's successful, then hopefully there's a little cha-ching in there for everybody as well. But I think it's much more if you're just thinking, well, all I've got to do is give my assistant a dollar or 2 hour raise and they're going to be happy, it's a band-aid. That's
Oh,
all it is. You've got to actually get to the emotional side of things and find out what's really important to them.
yeah, it's not all about money. It took me a little while to realize that, but I've been in practices and I'm making a lot of money, but I knew that they didn't actually value me. And I still went home at the end of the day not feeling great. So I just want to let people know it's not all about the hourly wage.
Yeah, and when you go home not feeling great, that alarm clock rings the next morning. It's a very ugly cycle that you can get into. And I think that's why a lot of dental assistants simply walk away at some point.
I remember at a practice I was at for a while, we all read, it was like the five love languages, but for like business, or I
Mhm.
can't remember exactly what it was called. Anyways, but we all read it together. And so we all learned how each of us wanted to be shown appreciation and it was all different. But I thought that was really valuable because I'm like, oh, you like it when I say nice things to you. I can do that more, you know?
And one of the things that I love to do, I love to teach personalities. I love to work with those so that everybody sees while you're all trying to get to that end goal, each of you think differently about how you're going to get there. And you're right. If we realize that you think differently than I do and vice versa, and it's okay to do that, and how do we make our individual superpowers come together to really help the team? Yeah, it changes the dynamic in the practice completely.
It does. It brought us all closer. And then it's like, I remember this clearly. One of the front desk, I would always say nice things to her because that's how I like to be shown appreciation as people say nice things. She
Mhm.
wasn't like that. She was more of an acts of service person. And once I realized that, I kind of switched and I would be like, can I help you with anything? Or let me do that or this or whatever. And it brings everyone closer.
And I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind is that if they're an acts of service person, that's one of the things that I want you to talk about in those meetings that we talked about twice a year. What happens on a bad day? How do you want to be approached? On a good day, how do you want to be approached? Absolutely.
So going back to just assistants and the challenges that they have, like what are some challenges that assistants face right now that are common?
Lack of respect.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we've touched on that. A lack of pay. That's a big one. I don't think that we talk a lot, and you and I have talked about this about the ergonomic side of things. But I think enough of them are also getting broken down, and that a lot of them are being forced to leave because of the physical side of things as well. So there's a lot of things that honestly, hygienists, the same kind of things that hygienists deal with on a lot of days, how do you make sure that those patients that maybe aren't so happy to be there and the emotional toll that it takes day after day after day, I think things like that, there's a lot more common ground with hygienists and assistants than we think. And I think that while the OPA may cause a rift and there may cause a little grumbling between the two sides, I think we've got to remember that at the end of the day, how do we work together on that? But it starts with finding out what's important to that assistant and really laying the groundwork from there.
How can we navigate this tension that you mentioned between assistants and hygienists? Because it's there and I feel like it's only going to get stronger.
I think what we're doing right now, we're talking about it. You're not just talking to hygienists and we're not just talking to assistants over here. We've got to say, look, this is what we're hearing, and have this other side say, well, here's what we're hearing, and really try to figure out, again, that common ground and maybe where there's some misinformation as well. I will tell you, I'm in a number of the dental assisting Facebook groups out there, and man, the comments that fly, and a lot of times I go, that's not exactly accurate. There's a lot of rage clicking and rage posting out there right now. And I think probably the same thing could be said on the hygiene side of things. So I think we've really got to figure out in our state, what is OPA going to look like? How soon is it coming? Is it a reality? What do we need to prepare for now so that if it comes, we really know what it not only impacts on the assisting side, but on the hygiene side as well.
I really like what you said that, like, when we look at assistants and hygienists as far as issues and challenges or whatever, a lot of it is the same thing. And I think remembering that we have all of this stuff in common, and just because an assistant maybe is an OPA, that doesn't mean they hate hygienists, you know?
No, no. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that are going to use this as a, oh my gosh, there's a war coming. it's simply not true. And I think that's what we've got to take a step back, take the emotion out of this, and really look, the practice is a business. We've got to approach it with a business mindset. What does this mean for my day? What does this mean for the bottom line? And absolutely have these conversations between hygienists and assistants about how do we work together on this. If they're truly trying to pitch this, and I will tell you, you will see this coming as assisted hygiene. You will see this pitched as a model for assisted hygiene. Take a step back and say, okay, what does that really mean? And what grains of truth is there in that?
Do you see this maybe starting more with like DSOs that are getting creative?
Maybe. It's funny you say that. I really hadn't considered that till you just said that. I will tell you, I've heard about it much more when the gentleman from the ADA was talking about it this past week in Washington. I got the feeling it was more with the solo practitioner side of
Okay.
things. That who really is trying to figure out, I don't have a hygienist, what do I do? Or I'm really trying to figure out where things are going in my business. That's a really good question. I'm going to have to do a little bit more digging on that. But my initial thought was that it was solo practitioners. But now that you say that, I may have to check into that.
I'm just curious, because
Yeah,
a lot of them have very good business models as far as like increasing revenue. And I feel like this might just be a way to do that. But you said that the OPA thing could be somewhat camouflaged by this term of assisted hygiene. So
yeah,
moving forward, do you recommend when people see that term assisted hygiene to really dig in and be like, what exactly does this mean for your practice?
I do. Because I think assisted hygiene is such a cloudy subject in and of
Yeah.
itself already, and different people do it different ways. So I think if you start hearing more and more buzz about this, dive into it and what does that really mean? Because again, one of the ways that I've heard it presented is that the dental hygienist will come in, do the supergingival scaling, and then it's almost a handoff to the hygienist. And so that's assisted hygiene. Boom, we're done.
Hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, it is, sure, but it's a completely different assisted hygiene than what we've talked about in the past. So I think really knowing when somebody throws that term out there, what does that mean for each party, I think is going to be critical.
And as far as pay, let's say an assistant is looking for a job and they find out that it is an OPA type thing and they'll get training or whatever it is. Do you recommend that they ask for a certain dollar amount above what a normal assistant makes?
I think you've got to look at, and I'll be honest, here's one thing I don't know. I don't know how you code this. I don't know what insurance reimbursement looks like for this. There's a lot of things I still don't know about this, and
Yeah.
I'm really trying to find out. But if you know that you are bringing in additional revenue because of this, and that's part of your job, then absolutely, I think you've got to look at what does that additional revenue look like, and then what can you say, this is a reasonable salary for me to make, knowing that I'm bringing in X amount of money per day or per patient or per month or however you want to look at it. I think that this is very much going to be a stake in the ground for dental assistants. Say, if you want me to do that, it's going to cost you. So I think dentists need to be very prepared for that. And again, this is when dentists need to know their numbers and their key metrics more than they ever have.
And so many of them don't,
No, no. Yeah,
which is
yeah,
crazy.
it is. Those KPIs that dental consultants have banged the drum on for years. There's so many. You ask a doctor, what's your recall rate? What's, your new patient rate? All these different things. They'll throw out numbers and you dig in their software and you go, it's not even close.
Yeah.
So I think that you've really got to know what are your profit margins right now and can you afford what you're getting ready to put into your practice?
I think this is a great opportunity for just advocating for yourself. If you're expected to do, if you're expected to become an OPA or even doing expanded functions like placing fillings and stuff, it's like you deserve more money and make sure that you get it or move on to the next one.
Absolutely. There was a statistic that I used up at Star of the North, and it's on the Dental Assisting National Board website, very easy to find. But it shows how much CDAs and FDAs make in states versus those who don't have those credentials behind their name. And it's like $5 to $6 more an hour. And I had so many dental assistants, whenever I showed that in my lecture, they came up and they're like, well, I don't understand. Why are they making more money? And I said, because they're put in the training and they're actually impacting the bottom line more. But those are the numbers of dental assistants you have to know. Again, if I'm impacting the bottom line to X, then here's what X means to my salary.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So with because I know that you have Ignite DA, is this something that you help assistants with?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. One of the things that I love to do, I'll be up in Montana speaking to dental assistants. I love to go around to the country and speak to assistants and really try to, with the Dental Assistant Nation podcast, I try to be always accessible to dental assistants. So absolutely, if there's a way that they want to reach out, if there's a way that we can brainstorm together, I'm just such a big believer that we've got to stop operating in silos and on little islands. And we've got to join together and learn from each other, because now it's more important than it ever has been.
Oh yeah, and I noticed like when I was a full-time clinician, I was in my little silo and I wasn't really like networking with other hygienists, and I thought that these issues I was having, I was the only one ever on the planet Earth that was having these problems. And then when
Yeah.
I started talking to people, I'm like, "Oh, we're all struggling with the same thing." And so I love that you've created a place for people to just get together and chat and stuff.
Well, you have to. And I think that we have to realize, I mean, there are a lot of dental assisting Facebook groups out there and a lot of things, but I think we've got to realize that there's got to be somewhere that it's a safe space, and it's also
Yeah.
one where you can get information that's actually accurate. So yeah, I appreciate that. And that's one of the big things I try to do, is because I will walk into a room and dental assistants come, oh, I've heard this. And what does this mean? And I'm like, it's not exactly accurate. It's more this. So that's my whole thing, is how can we make sure we're really talking the same language and not getting upset about something that may not come to fruition.
You just got to watch it with these Facebook groups too. Cause I've actually just stopped engaging with a lot of the groups, but it's like you go on there and you're like, oh, so all assistants hate hygienists or all hygienists hate assistants. And that is so not true, but that's kind of the vibe you get sometimes.
Oh, it absolutely is. We're going to have torches and pitchforks after each other real soon, right? And
Yeah.
I don't really think that's the case. I think hygienists who are listening, there's just as much concern and questions from the assisting side of things as you have. And I think that's what we've got to knock down, these walls that are between the two, and say, I don't understand what's going on either. And as you said earlier, I feel like a pawn on the assistant side of things. And I think just knowing that would change a hygienist perspective that thinks they're coming from my job, and all these different things that I've heard as well.
Yeah. So what would you tell like practice owners or dentists or whoever is wanting to push the OPA? Like what would you tell them when they're clearly not taking assistants' opinions into consideration?
It's just like bringing a laser into the practice or introducing a CAD cam or anything else. How does it impact every person in the practice and their day? And you've got to be very upfront and honest about it. This can't be a surprise. It can't be a we'll figure it out. It's got to be something that this is what we're looking to do. This is what it means. And this is how it's going to impact our daily flow. And I think you really have to get very granular and business focused whenever you're talking about this. Take the emotions out of it, and if you don't know the answer, admit that and say, I'm looking into this. And as soon as I know, we'll figure it out together. Because I think if there's anything that is going to hurt moving forward, it's going to be that somebody believes that you're keeping a piece of this from them, or that you've got another plan that doesn't include them. I think you've just got to really say, let's figure this out together and let's talk about it.
So communication, just like literally
Yeah.
everything else in life.
Yeah. Hey, I'm a journalism major. I'm a PR guy. It's all about communication. It always is. But I think that we overlook that so often, and we just say, we're just going to implement it. We'll see what happens. Worst possible thing you could do.
Yeah, I agree. And also don't be tricked with the tricky term of assisted hygiene. Like to really
Yeah.
dig in and see what that
Yeah.
means.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we've thrown a lot of terms out there in our society that we think is just going to, people understand that. No, let's dig in and let's really see what it means. You're right.
Yeah. Well, before we close out, there was one other thing I wanted to get your opinion on was local anesthesia and dental assistants giving that. What's your take on that?
My take on that is it's like with everything else. If it's going to happen, you've got to make sure it's done properly. And you have to make sure that it's something that the dental assistant feels comfortable doing. And you also have to have it, the understanding in there of what that means for his or her job in the grand scheme of the dental practice. I think we're going to see more and more things in the coming months, in the coming years. We're going to see more and more things introduced. Oh, the assistant could do this. Oh, what if we tried this? And I really think that we have to understand, take that step back and say, what does this mean, not only for the assistant's day, but also the relationships in the practice? The worst thing that can happen is that we break into all these turf wars. I think it's just got to be something that, again, you understand the why behind it. And if it's going to happen in your practice with local anesthesia or anything else, do you feel confident enough with training and what's been given to you for it to actually happen?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. So something, Kevin, that I do on my podcast is I all of a sudden towards the end, I remember all these questions that I want to ask. So there's just one more.
No worries.
I have a podcast episode dropping today on insurance reform. And it's my opinion that a lot of the issues that we have right now are originating from poor insurance reimbursements. I mean, do you think that that's another thing that we need to focus on, is fixing
Oh
that?
my gosh, yes. I talked about tariffs earlier, and I know
Yeah.
that people get it out whenever you mention anything about that. But look, dental practice, that if costs go up, the Delta Dentals of the world aren't going to reimburse you more because your costs are going up. And so I think we've really got to look at if this is a long-term added cost that there's going to be to the practice. Think back to COVID and all the numbers that we were spending for PPE back in the day. And I think you've got to look at not only PPE, but everything that's coming into your practice right now, from materials to that PPE. You're not going to get reimbursed for that from your insurance. So I think that is one of the biggest things that if I was predicting, I think that's one of the biggest things we're going to have to solve by the end of the year if these tariffs are here to stay and if it means additional costs, because we're eventually passing those on to the consumer, and eventually that consumer is going to go, do I really need to go in for that cleaning? Do I really need to go in for that checkup? And I think that that's where we've got to figure out, if they're paying more out of pocket, how do they really see the value in coming into our praxis?
I just feel like this is something that we've needed to address for a long time. And it's always been that huge, like scary elephant in the room that no one wants to deal with, because it's a huge thing. Like, we're all going to have to unite as a profession, and it's not easy for that to happen. But I mean, the OPA or allowing assistants or whoever to do whatever in the practice, it's not going to solve poor insurance reimbursements. We're still going to have this issue. So I think we need to really devote some time to that.
We absolutely do. And I agree with you. And I know if you're, a lot of assistants, a lot of hygienists will kind of shrug and go, it doesn't really impact my day. Well, it does. And I will tell you, it impacts your patient base. And I think whenever we look at our practices as businesses and our patients as customers, it changes our dynamic completely, because all of a sudden those customers are going, wait a minute, is my insurance even worth this? Why am I spending this to do this? We've really got to be educating about that oral systemic link, and really hammering home the fact that seeing the dentist and coming into the hygienist and that assistant has your best interests in mind. We've really got to be hammering that home now more than ever.
Yeah, there's so much work to do. It's hard to even know where to start. But any final words for dental assistants before we close out?
You matter. We need you. And we don't just need assistants right now. We don't just need bodies. We need bodies that care. We need bodies that actually want to be there and that have their patients' interests at heart. And so if there's a dental assistant listening out there, absolutely know you are valued, and know that more than ever, we need you to stay in this industry. And that's my hope and my prayer, is that we don't lose any more just because they didn't feel like that they made a difference.
Yeah, and I second that, Kevin. I have so much respect for what assistants do, and they literally keep the practice running, and I don't think that they get the appreciation that they deserve.
Well, it can change. I really
Yeah.
believe that. You mentioned the practice dynamic you work in. My hope for every dental assistant is that they have a practice like that. I know it's not a reality, but I hope one of these days that all dental practices will see the value of the assistant and make sure that he or she isn't overloaded and burned out.
Well, in practices too, with this practice in particular, they value, I mean, they value everyone, but their hygienists, or excuse me, their assistants a lot. And it shows in the numbers. Like it isn't just a feel good thing, it's like a practice success thing. So it's worth it.
I love that. And I think whenever you walk into any business as a consumer, you can feel the vibe that's in there. And I think whenever you walk into a practice that people actually respect each other and enjoy working with each other, absolutely. All those worries about, oh, I'm walking into the dentist, those go away a little bit because you feel a different vibe in there than you would in other practices.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, if anybody wants to connect with you, contact you, pick your brain, what's the best place for that?
Yeah, reach out to me through kevinspeaksdental.com. It's Kevin at kevinspeaksdental.com. And absolutely, yeah, listen to Dental Assistant Nation podcast. They're short, sweet, to the point for dental assistants. Every Monday, you've got a new episode that drops. And I just appreciate you reaching out, Stephanie. I really do, because I think that this is an issue that we've got to be talking about more instead of just sitting there and shrugging our shoulders and going, well, we'll see what happens. No, I think we've got to be proactive. So I appreciate you doing that.
Oh yeah, no, I loved hearing this perspective, and it kind of echoes just what I've heard about on social, but it just it means a lot coming from you. So thank you, and I'll make sure to put all of your links, including your podcast, down in the show
Yeah.
notes. And thanks again, Kevin.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, and thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time.